Hi everybody, it's Tim. Recently we've been teasing a new podcast about the manga Fullmetal Alchemist as an upcoming goal to be unlocked at patreon.com/deconcomics. The podcast is called The Law of Equivalent Exchange, and Patrick and I recorded the first 3 episodes way back in March. We decided to go ahead and release those first 3 episodes here in the Deconstructing Comics feed and hopefully drum up some interest in continuing the new podcast in its own feed. So this week we present the first episode of The Law of Equivalent Exchange, and the next 2 will appear in this feed over the next couple of months. Enjoy! The Law of Equivalent Exchange. This is Tim with Patrick. How are you doing, Patrick?
I'm doing good.
And we are 2 Americans who live in Japan and decided we wanted to do a podcast about the manga, not the anime, the manga of Fullmetal Alchemist. Maybe when we finish this, we might carry on and do the anime. I don't know. But since we're both kind of more comics guys, we wanted to talk about the manga itself, the original Hiromu Arakawa work, rather than, the anime comes later and it's a little bit, it goes in a different direction because she just let them finish the story themselves rather than relying on what her plans were, which sounds kind of interesting. I haven't actually watched it, but...
Actually, like most animated shows, when the comic hasn't been completed yet, that's what they end up doing. They just let the studio or network decide what they're going to do. And they might have some input, I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I know in her case, she was sort of interested in seeing what they would do. So I think she intentionally was just kind of hands-off on the direction of the anime. And, yeah, she expressed, interest in... she thought it was interesting the direction that they took the homunculi, which was, I guess, quite different from what's in the manga.
Well, sometimes it works, and sometimes you get Game of Thrones Season 8.
Yeah. So Hiromu Arakawa is a woman from Hokkaido, where her family had a dairy farm, and so in like the opening notes or closing notes, she'll represent herself as a cow wearing glasses.
Yeah, it's a really interesting choice. I like when authors do that. It kind of inspired me to use a rabbit for myself.
Oh.
Because in Japanese, rabbits are usagi, and usa is written as USA, and I'm American, so that's why.
Okay. And yeah, we should introduce ourselves. You do some manga or comics related work.
Yes, well, I have just started going back to school as a research student in preparation for getting a PhD, and I've been heavily studying horror comics from the US and Japan. And last year, well, actually coming up next month, I'll have my first research published, which is actually how to translate American comic book sound effects that are often originally created by creators and not something you can easily find in a dictionary. Though I did make a dictionary for those things.
Yeah, you've been working on that for some time.
This is true.
Years-long project.
True. Yeah, so it's finally getting published, and so I've moved on to other topics, and in fact, I just submitted a proposal to talk about the Oni in Kimetsu no Yaiba, the Demon Slayer, and The Promised Neverland, 2 series, which I enjoy.
Okay, yeah, and Oni are like ogres, or what's the best word for them in English?
Well, they're often translated as ogres or demons, but I feel that they're a different beast. So I'd rather mostly just call them Oni, and then people say, "What's that?" And then I can explain.
Okay. So I'm Tim, and I've been podcasting for almost 15 years. I have a podcasting problem, but I'm not, rather than seeking help, I'm just starting another series. I've been doing Deconstructing Comics for almost 15 years. The first podcast that I started with a couple of other guys. Patrick has been on once in a while. I also do a podcast on Batman 66, the TV show with Adam West, with my brother, who, of course, we watched it together frequently growing up. And I used to do an English study podcast called Machigai Podcast, but it's out there still. It's available, but I just didn't have the time to make any more. So that's still out there, too. Plus, on our Patreon page, on the Deconstructing Comics Patreon page, there is a podcast about Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. We just got to the end, or, the end so far, and now we're going to go back and do the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies.
And we met, I guess, that was 2006.
6 or
I believe.
7.
Was
maybe.
it 7? Might have been 7. It was when I did my first solo art show, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right, and our friends Mulele and another guy named Patrick were interested in it. I heard about it from them. I think they went to the opening and I went to the closing because I couldn't go to the opening.
Yeah, and we hit it off pretty quickly with very similar interests, especially in comics.
Yeah, well, I think the four of us met up one time and recorded like 3 episodes of Deconstructing Comics back to back.
Yeah, and I think they had to bleep me a lot. I was dropping the bombs, so to speak. Tim, why did we choose this comic?
Well, so I was reading it back some years ago when I was working on a U.S. base here in Japan. And after I read Fullmetal Alchemist, I just never could find another manga that was as interesting to me. It might even be my favorite comic of all, out from any tradition, let alone Japanese. I did a Deconstructing Comics episode way back in 2010 about just the first 19 volumes because that was all the library had at the time. And I'd been wanting to reread it and been wanting to do a podcast about it for a long time. Well, and the way things work for me, if I don't do a podcast about it, I probably won't get around to reading it. So it's a way of getting myself, making the time to read it. Although I've got to do a podcast about it, so I got to read it.
Yeah, that's how I am about fanzines. If I have that deadline, if I have that show that I need to have the book ready by, then I'll do the thing that I've been telling myself I want to do. But in my case, I saw it pretty early on when it was just starting to come out. I liked the character designs, especially the 2 brothers. The armor design was quite unique and interesting.
Yeah, well, the character designs are really eye-catching. It's really well done, just the look of it. And
the comic itself, the layout is clean, so easy to read, and so just the rhythm is nice. And so like when you hit the surprise funny parts, it really gets you. But I have to admit though, it took my 3rd time to go all the way through. And it's not because the comic was bad or anything. I think I was, when I first started reading it, it hadn't been finished, and I was wondering if it was ever going to be finished, and I don't like getting dragged into a series that, like, just, never ends and has 100 frickin' volumes, And,
Dragon Ball.
Yeah. And then the second time I said, all right, this time I'm gonna go all the way through it. I bought it, and I think what happened is that I started my master's degree program. And so I was mostly focusing on reading for that. And then, but of course, my wife read through the whole thing. She's the fastest reader I've ever seen. She zips through that thing. And she immediately, like a week later, rereads the whole thing again. And she tells me, you've got to read it so we can talk about it, because it's the most put together series that she's ever read. And she's read a lot of comics. And what she means is, like, when we watch a movie, if she doesn't like how the ending ties everything up perfectly, then she hates the movie, no matter how good the first 90% was. I'm not like that. I forget endings. So so I love Stephen King, because that's always where he kind of drops the ball, is near the end. And not always, but so I can reread mysteries all the time because I can't remember who the bad guy was. But she was really excited about it, and she doesn't really get that vocal about stuff. So third time's a charm. Zipped right through it. And the funny thing is, before the second and third read, my friend Jim, who lives in Saitama, he came to visit me, and we drove up north to the Kitakyushu Manga Museum, and they had an exhibition of all the painted artwork, all the covers, and almost the whole last chapter in this on display. And so I looked at the paintings and I looked at the covers, but I had to put on blinders. I was kind of like blinking as I walked through the last chapter, because I hadn't read the last chapter yet. It was I was like, damn it. So yeah,
this museum exhibit has spoilers.
That's right. Totally had spoilers. Everybody was like, well, everybody's read it by now, right? You know, that's like what they do with Star Wars. And it used to work, you know. Tim, you work with younger people sometimes. You know that, like, it's so easy to meet people that haven't seen Star Wars. So it's like, you can't assume anymore. And
right.
But if you're going to an art showing of the art for this, I guess they're not wrong to assume you've probably read it.
Yeah. So this appeared in Japanese in the monthly magazine Shonen Gangan from July 2001 to June 2010. So exactly 9 years. And since it was in a monthly manga, the chapters are longer than they would be if it were a weekly series, which really works well for this, because it gets kind of deep in places and it needs more space to breathe like that.
Yeah, that's definitely a plus. If you're not trying to meet like a weekly deadline, then I think there's not as much pressure, and a lot less 2-page splashes. You know what I mean? People just trying to make their page quota. But it's every story has exactly the number of pages it needs.
Yeah. Came out in English, first volume, May 2005, from Viz Media, and the English language volume 1 was the top-selling graphic novel of 2005. I guess that means in the U.S. or in English. I'm not quite sure about that stat.
Yeah, those stats tend to be Americocentric.
Final English volume came out, or was printed. I have the first printing of the final volume, December 2011. The Japanese title is Hagane no Renkin Jutsushi, which literally is Alchemist of Steel. And I had wondered about where the English title came from. You pointed out to me that it must have been Arakawa herself. It's in English and Japanese on the title page of the very first chapter.
Yes. I think that in many cases it's either it's going to be the author themselves or a persuasive editor, because editors have a bigger part in Japanese comics than we often realize. I'm just going to guess it was the author, and I think it was an interesting choice. The word full metal was kind of popular in Japanese media ever since the Full Metal Jacket movie.
Mm-hmm. Which was Fullmetal Jacket in Japanese. So
that's right, it wasn't translated.
Yeah.
And I think it does have more impact, and it's cooler than just Steel Alchemist.
Yeah, that's true. And also, it makes a nice logo because the two words are about the same length. So the logo is nice and square or rectangular.
Oh yeah, the logo itself also was intriguing to me because you have the steel part with big screws in part of the design, and then the rest of it is, the design's more Baroque, but it also has kind of almost like a creepy, otherworldly Cthulhu tentacly type of feel going on there.
Now, the inclusion of alchemy in the comic is kind of interesting. Arakawa has expanded on what alchemy really was, although real alchemy did have more to it than just turning lead into gold. Now, you've read more about this than I have, but what were kind of the basics of real alchemy?
From what I've read, a lot of it was like trying to find like the perfect substance. And every step in creating this perfect substance or perfect being is related to like biblical scripture, and it's all very philosophical at the same time of trying to be scientific. And a lot of it was combining the perfect balance of male and female, so like the Hermes and the Aphrodite aspects, from where you get the word hermaphrodite. And so, yeah, it's very intriguing stuff. I think you mentioned before the humors and the elements. It's
right, yeah, it was based on the belief in the four main elements, air, water, earth, and fire, that supposedly made up everything.
Yeah, a lot of it is trying to find like basically a universal rule for existence, and there was all, so it's, I think of course different alchemists had different approaches and different focuses, but I think it was more than just like, let's make some gold.
Yeah, so they believed that various metals were all the same thing at different stages of development, and they wanted to find a philosopher's stone, which actually wasn't a stone. It was a wax or a liquid or a powder. I guess somebody actually had something that they said was a philosopher's stone. But with a philosopher's stone, supposedly you could evolve the base metals into gold, which was the state that they were supposed to be headed for anyway. You're just speeding up that process. But they didn't understand that the metals were not all the same substance in different stages.
Yeah, there was a lot of interesting beliefs that even though they don't work with physical laws, like philosophically, they're still quite interesting. So I like how in this world you do have the fact that the characters are supremely focused on science, but the philosophy part is not ignored. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think that's another thing I like about this series.
Yeah, and in the real world, there were kind of different versions of alchemy in different parts of the world, and that's reflected in the manga with the country Xing, which is basically China, and they have a different version of alchemy. They don't show up for quite a while yet. I don't remember when we first encountered Xing, but yeah, it's certainly not in the first volume.
No, it's way down the line. That's why I've already half forgotten it. I'm looking forward to re-remembering.
you've pointed out before that a lot of manga get kind of too involved in systems, especially maybe shonen manga. Like One Punch Man, there's this hero ranking system that just sort of takes over the comic after a few volumes, and it becomes less interesting because of that.
Yeah, for me it was Hunter versus Hunter that kind of killed it for me, when it was pages upon pages of explaining like how the power system works, and I was like, this is fun if you're a game developer, but it's not so much fun for me as a reader. But I do understand Japan is a very hierarchical society. I mean, when two people meet and they're similar ages, they have to ask, like, what year were you born? And then if they're the same year, then they ask what month were you born? And then what day were you born? Oh, okay, I'm the senpai. It's I understand that that mindset. But for me, like, that part, I don't mind having a strong system in there, but I don't need it explained to me. So, yeah, so this particular system has one rule, and that's the name of our podcast.
Right, the law of equivalent exchange. So if you want to change something into something else, it has to be equal. You have to get back, the same amount that you put in.
Exactly.
I'm reading the 16th printing of Volume 1 here in English, printed in May 2013. And this is all black and white, including the parts that were color in the original. But I think you're reading the Japanese version.
That's right. Mine's the 55th printing. In 2010, it's the 55th printing.
Yikes.
So it's quite a popular series.
Yes. So our main characters are Edward and Alphonse Elric, and this is Chapter 1, The Two Alchemists, and it starts out with a flashback. Well, it's kind of a flashback. It's before the rest of the story. This is sort of the origin story that's being hinted at here, where Edward is... we don't get straight-on shots until the last panel, but we can see it's in some kind of maybe library. Edward is calling out to Alphonse, and he's gone. And we see some of a transmutation circle that's been chalked onto the floor. And Edward is missing the lower part of his left leg. Significantly, he still has both arms, which, we're on page 1. We don't realize that that's important, but it will turn out to be important.
Yeah, and when we open up to the splash, which is obviously originally color, it's got a clearer view of what a transmutation circle might look like. Mm-hmm. And it's got gears in there, and it's got our two heroes face in dramatic poses. But it sets up when we jump right into the little town that they're about to show up in, and there's a radio broadcast on top of a pole with a bunch of signs. So it already is giving us a feel of there's technology in this world, and that there's there's approaching modern architecture, and some modern contrivances like the radio. But a lot of the series still has a very strong fantasy world type feel to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess there's been an online conversation about whether Fullmetal Alchemist is steampunk, and it kind of is. It's kind of steampunk adjacent. It certainly has some of that Victorian feeling to it.
How punk do you have to be steampunk?
I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on the term, but
because it might just be steam polka. You just don't know. But yeah, as I was reading it, the word steampunk, it never even came into my mind once. So since I'm always right, it's not. I'm joking, people. I'm joking. So they're at the bar. It looks like an outside bar, solid kiosk kind of place that just says food.
Food. Does it just say food in Japanese, in English?
Yes, just says food in Japanese. And you can see the radio next to the sign above the heads of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it's squawking out this religious broadcast that the townspeople seem really into.
Right, and the proprietor of the kiosk says that that's Father Cornello, the sun god Leto's emissary. Edward is eating. Al is just sitting there because he's a suit of armor. We'll find later that he's not capable of eating or doesn't need to eat in the state.
Yeah, and so by the way, this podcast is going to be spoilerific. You know, we recommend you read the chapters before you listen in so that we can get right into the good stuff.
Right, yeah, we're reading it and talking about everything that happens in it. So, yeah, we're not going to pull back on anything. Al stands up and knocks the radio off the little shelf that it's been on, and it crashes to the floor in a million pieces. And Ed makes a transmutation circle and regenerates the radio. It's good as new. And people ask, can you work miracles? And Ed says, miracles. Al says, we're just alchemists.
In the previous page, he's saying he has no interest in religion whatsoever, so the radio broadcast was kind of boring him anyway, and the townspeople talking about how great their Cornello is didn't seem to interest him much.
And, you know, this immediately draws the opposition of their science-based approach and Father Cornello talking about religion and miracles, and they've been able to do something that looks like a miracle, but to them it's just science.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're like, and so they said, well, yeah, of course. Don't you know us? Or don't you know me? I'm the Fullmetal Alchemist, Edward Elric. But
well,
the townspeople...
the way he says it, yeah, have you ever heard of?
Oh, yeah, that makes more sense.
And then they assume that the Fullmetal Alchemist is Al because he is, quote-unquote, wearing a suit of armor. So he appears to be full metal. And, you know, that's an easy misunderstanding to have. That was what I thought before I started reading this.
Yeah, but then Al says, no, it's my big brother over there. And they're like, what, that little guy?
Right, and Ed is very sensitive about his height, and so he's shouting out, I'm not little, don't call me midget or shorty or shrimp, and sound effects smash, crash, and the people are saying, we didn't say any of that. He's kind of beating them up, apparently, or he's just, you know, having a tantrum, knocking everything around. He's like, it's me, I'm the Fullmetal Alchemist, Edward Elric. Sorry about that.
Yeah. And then appears on the scene the character Rosé. I'm surprised they kept her name Rosé in English.
Yeah, there's an accent mark over the E. There's a temptation to just call her Rose, but yeah, it's Rosé, like the wine, I guess.
Yep.
And her design, she has this kind of weird white hair in the front. I don't know if she's going prematurely gray or if that's highlights or what that is, but
you know what, I'm not sure, but I keep thinking that that those highlights are pink for some reason.
Are they pink in the anime?
It's very possible.
I don't know. Mine's all black and white, so I don't have a way to check. It just looks white here. Yeah,
they're light pink.
Okay.
But I think, you know, like a lot of the colors that we don't normally see until the anime were probably shown in the comic because they often have color inserts and color covers where sometimes we can tell. But in this case, yeah, it's her first appearance. We have no idea.
And the people are talking about how she's become so happy lately thanks to Father Cornello, the guy who was preaching on the radio earlier. And they tell Ed and Al after she leaves that she has no family and she lost her boyfriend last year in an accident. And so she had been really sad, but now that she's learned about the sun god Leto from Father Cornello, she's looking happy again.
Yep.
And, yeah, Father Cornello raises the dead, and the souls of his faithful live forever. Ed says, raise the dead, huh? I don't like the sound of that.
In the Japanese, it's more like, sounds like BS. But then we switch scenes to Cornello giving the broadcast. So he's got his worshippers coming up to talk to him. Of course, Rose is wondering when Cornello's going to raise her dead boyfriend, who died a year ago.
Right. Now, she doesn't actually say that here. We don't know quite what she's talking about, but she's saying, when will you be able to... ... But he says, it's not yet time. He's putting it off. Probably because he's not capable of doing it, but he wants to lead everybody on to think that he can do these things.
And yeah, she's, of course, bought it hook, line, and sinker, and it seems to be her whole purpose for going on, the fact that she thinks that her boyfriend's going to be coming back to her.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, Ed's not buying it.
Right. Ed and Al are outside when she comes back out of Father Cornello's room, and she's surprised to see them, hoping that maybe they will become followers of the sun god Leto.
Who, the statue, he looks more like Poseidon.
Yeah, I thought that too. Poseidon, Neptune. Yeah, it looks more like a sea god than a sun god, although there is a sun behind him, but...
Yeah, it's the crown, which I think is supposed to be more of like a sun crown, reminds us of the traditional imagery of those sea gods, and he's got a staff.
Yeah.
So, which kind of reminds us of the tridents and such, so...
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he's starts talking about, why he doesn't believe in religion. I mean, he believes in science.
Yeah, and he questions, her belief that if you pray to God, the dead will come back to life, but she believes it, and he points out, the things that a body is made of: water 35 liters, carbon 20 kilograms, ammonia 4 liters, and so on. And science knows all of that, but there's never been a single example of successful human transmutation. It's like there's some missing ingredient, he says.
Yes, and he also mentions how most of those ingredients can be bought with, like, pocket change, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of a comment on the cheapness of life, in a way, kind of an indirect comment on that. And
or what's amazing about it, that it's made of such cheap materials, and yet we can't duplicate it.
That's right. And of course, when we hear there's something missing, of course we think it must have to do with the soul, or something like that. That otherwise, what else? What could it be?
Yeah, scientists have been trying to find that missing ingredient, for hundreds of years, pouring tons of money into research, and to this day, they don't have a theory. They say science is a lost cause, but I think it's better than sitting around praying and waiting for something to happen. So, yeah, he's proactive. He doesn't want to just rely on faith like Rosé does.
Well, this is what I like about this, because religion's very, very touchy subject, even in Japan, where most people don't seem to care about religion, but there's, the people who follow different sects of Buddhism here. There's the Buddhism where, basically Buddha helps those who help themselves, and then there's those people who give lots of money and pray and just want someone to do all the work for them. So it's I think the point he's making here is very interesting in light of that.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that this came up in a Japanese comic because, I don't know, a lot of Japanese will say that they're not religious at all. And
yes.
Yet it seems to be addressing issues of religion that, come up in America all the time.
And I would say that they follow a lot of rites. They follow a lot of rituals, which basically means that they are moving. They're like the cogs moving the engine of religion without really understanding much about the religion. If you tried to talk to the typical supposed Buddhist about reincarnation, they have just a very, gloss over kind of idea without really, you can't have a deep conversation with them about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that for them to say they're not religious is basically they don't think about it, but they do the things, they visit the temples, they visit the shrines, and they get married in faux chapels. So they're going through the rituals. So it's really hard to say that Japanese aren't religious because they're I'm just repeating myself because they're doing the rituals.
Yeah.
But that's why I thought it's very rare that this topic is kind of brought up. And of course, that's one of the good things that science fiction and fantasy is excellent for. It's bringing up topics that you can't talk about normally.
So they continued talking about religion, saying, he's telling her alchemists are scientists. We don't believe in unprovable concepts like God. And she thinks that he sounds like he thinks he's the equal of God. And he says, well, it's like that myth about the hero, referring to Icarus. He made wings out of wax so he could fly. But when he got too close to the sun, to God, and it's interesting he mentions God there, the wax melted and he crashed to the ground. And she just has a question mark in her word balloon. She doesn't follow him.
Well, yeah, for her, I'm sure it feels kind of non sequitur. But we see him casually touching his left leg, and we see his right arm. The way that the panel has been designed, it's still part of the upper panel, but it's been kind of separated. And we also see his brother's armor in kind of a darkened panel. So we know that there's more context coming across. We're just not sure what it is yet.
Yeah, and his leg is really prominent in that panel. It's overlapping into the next panel.
Yeah, it's just the way that it was set up. It's basically the camera was positioned so that the leg would be the closest thing to the camera, and so looks larger than the rest of the body. And it's obviously, not a typical shot. So that's where, we feel it's kind of being, what's the word I'm looking for?
Emphasized?
Emphasized. There's another word I was looking for, but that works.
Okay. So then we're outdoors, and Cornello is out there, and people are throwing flowers, looks like roses, toward him, and he grabs one and changes it into a sunflower. And Ed and Al are watching. Al says, that kind of transmutation has to be alchemy. But what about the laws? Other people are saying, see, he has miraculous powers, but Ed says, no, that's alchemy, no matter how you look at it. Cornello's a fraud. And Al, but he can bypass the laws for some reason. And Rosé doesn't know what they're talking about. She says,
She's
the laws?
Like, laws? Yeah.
And Ed tries to explain it, but it's kind of going over her head, and there's a swirl behind her head and a lot of question marks, and she says, duh.
Well, the duh makes her sound really stupid, but this just has, it says guru, which is echoing the spiral going around her head. So it's more like just it's kind of the ideas are maybe knocking around her head and she doesn't know how to make sense of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it means she's stupid. So
Right, yeah, it's a translation kind of problem because there's not really a good way to express that Japanese guru guru. Maybe
yeah. There's
in English.
Sound effects are always the challenge, especially when you're going from Japanese to other languages, because there's so many high context, not really sounds.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know. But what's funny is that when you are talking with people and they will say the sound effects that they are going through, you know, the emotions, they're expressing the emotions through sound effects. They will say the sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
So but you can imagine somebody actually standing there and their head spinning and going good or like that. I mean, that actually happens in conversation, which I find fascinating.
Yes.
So, but basically, this is explaining where it's not like alchemists can endlessly create tons and tons of things out of nothing. They, you know, there has to be an equal amount in exchange if you want to create something. Basically, matter can't be destroyed or recreated from zero.
Yeah, Al says a substance can only be created from the same type of substance. For example, if something's mostly water, you can only use it to make other things with the attributes of water. So that sounds a little bit like real alchemy, where that idea that all metals were the same substance, just in different states of development.
Right. So, like, if we were talking the Wonder Twins, then the sister who could form things out of water, she follows the laws, but the brother, I'm not sure, who can become animals. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that works too. There.
Yeah, and Ed names it. You know, in other words, the basics of alchemy is the equivalent exchange. That means that to obtain something of equal value must be lost. And then they spot the ring that Cornello is wearing, and Ed says, "I think we found it." They don't say what it is. They found it. And now Ed is sounding more interested in the religion because he wants to speak to Cornello.
It's visually shown. I mean, it's not just that he quickly turns toward Rosé. It's also he's kind of changing his attitude, and you can see like flowers and
Mm-hmm.
and like confetti around him, like, hey.
Yeah, and he's drawn in kind of a cartoony way in that panel.
Yeah,
less realistic than he was when he was skeptical.
Right. And so now he's suddenly very interested in religion.
So then we see Cornello with one of his helpers, and the helper is saying, "The Ulrich brothers here want to talk to you," and Cornello's kind of busted. This is bad because he knows that Edward Elric is the Fullmetal Alchemist, and they're not sure what to do. But then Cornello says, "Yeah, it seems the dogs of the military have good noses." He's a state alchemist, Edward, and they keep using that term, the dogs of the military.
That's right. That term gets used a lot. Basically, dog of the state, dog of the military. Basically, lapdog is what they're getting at. That there's a lot of kind of anti-state, anti-big, bad government sentiment running through the series, and the fact that everything is laid out so clearly here in the very first chapter is a testament to. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to, get your main characters out there and get the world pretty much sussed out early on. But I think she did an amazing job of it. And when I saw this helper, I immediately thought of Superman artist Ed McGuinness, the way that he draws all these. All his characters are super muscly thick, and got those great cheekbones.
Yes.
But obviously we know here that Cornello is if he's worried about something, then yeah, of course he is a fraud, and they're going to welcome the Elric brothers in, and maybe never let them out.
Yeah. He says to his helper, let's just say they never came here. How does that sound? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
And this is obviously because Cornello is not supposed to be doing this kind of alchemy stuff without being, I guess, registered by the state, is what I think is kind of being intimated.
Mm-hmm.
That he's using these powers for personal gain, which is probably a big old no-no.
Right, and also he's breaking the equivalent exchange laws. He's making little roses into big sunflowers.
Yep. And making promises like bringing people back from the dead, which is also a big no-no.
Yeah, and no one's ever succeeded at it even. And so the Ed McGuinness guy leads them into another room, Ed and Al and Rosé, and pulls out a gun, points it right in the suit of armor's eye hole, and shoots the helmet clean off of the armor.
It's a quite, shocking panel, because it's like, what? He blows our one of our main characters' head clean off, and we can see why he went for Al first. He's the bigger, scarier looking one, and Ed is a shorter. So he's probably looks less threatening. So
well, and this helper might have also thought that Al was the Fullmetal Alchemist.
Very good point.
I don't think I don't think there's anything showing that he knows who is who. And of course, it's lucky for the story that he chooses to use his gun first where it's going to be least effective.
Yeah. Rather
than shooting Ed in the head, which would end the comic in chapter 1.
Yeah, but of course we don't quite know this yet. We see Ed being held down with weapons, stabs, by other helpers, and we see Al's head lying on the ground smoking.
And the sound effect and motion lines block out the fact that the suit of armor is empty as it falls to the floor. It's just kind of the impact has knocked him down, not that he's dead. But yeah, we can't see that there's nothing inside the armor.
That's right. So it's, very interesting. Interesting. And everything's happening so quickly. You don't really have time for your brain to say, wait a minute, they can't get rid of that character so quickly. So when Al does grab the gun from the helper, and the helper looks, and it's this headless, empty suit of armor, we, the readers, and the helper at the same time going, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, this first chapter is so full of reveals. And, Mulele and I, on our spin-off of Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, we've read a lot of comics submitted by listeners, and a lot of times, new creators want to hold everything back and keep you guessing, but they hold back too much, so you just don't understand what the hell is going on, and you don't even feel like reading anymore.
I don't know who the characters are. I don't know where we are. I don't know what they're doing.
But she's been very good. She holds back information and she lets it drip out, right through the first chapter. Which one is the Fullmetal Alchemist? This suit of armor is walking around empty. And there are more reveals later on in this very first chapter.
Yeah, it's very excellent storytelling throughout, I have to say.
Yes.
And so I can see why you would easily consider it possibly your favorite comic of all the comics that you like It's definitely up there for me, too.
So Ed and Al are beating up the henchmen, basically. Rosé is shocked to see the headless, empty suit of armor running around and fighting people. She looks, incredibly shocked. Says, "What is this?" And Ed says, "Nothing special." Kind of taps on the armor, bang, bang, and the headless armor says, "It's just what it looks like."
Yeah, but she's got, confirmation bias, of course. She has a lot invested in wanting to get her boyfriend back, so she's not eager to believe what's right in front of her face.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they go in to confront... I keep wanting to call him Cornholio.
Throw some beanbags.
That's right.
Yeah, well, we get another hint at the origin. Al, as he's putting his head back on, says, "You might say this is what happens when you commit the greatest sin, when you trespass in God's domain." But they don't elaborate. And they go in to see Cornello, and it's this big dark room. You see their Ed and Al's silhouettes as they come into this dark room. And then Cornello appears on a stairway and is playing dumb. Like, "Oh, hi, did you come to hear me preach?" But Ed's able to knock him out of that mode by saying, "That's the Philosopher's Stone on your finger, isn't it?"
We see he's reacting, but he's reacting... like it's very subtle. It's like it's the sound of a vein in your temple throbbing, basically. And it's a slight and then we have a visual, but his face hasn't changed. He's still trying to maintain the poker face, but obviously he realizes that the jig is up.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, his mood quickly changes. Correct. The Philosopher's Stone, the legendary catalyst, the amplifier of all alchemical processes. With this, I can conjure at the minimum price for the maximum result. And he's not smiling anymore. He looks very serious. Ed says, "How long I've searched for that."
I want to say he looks almost imperious.
Mm-hmm.
Very self-righteous.
Ed asks, "What do you get out of founding this phony religion? You can make as much money as you want just with the stone." But Cornello has the idea that he's going to get so many followers that he'll have an invincible army of fanatics with no fear of death, and he'll be able to take over the entire nation. And he laughs evilly. Ha 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 ha.
Yep, a lot of ha's. And what's funny is that when we're on this page, it's ending the page with his maniacal laughter and this dramatic scene. And when we flip it over, we're immediately confronted by Ed literally tossing the idea to the side in a very simple, humorously drawn panel, which totally negates the serious, the dramatic panel. And so basically he's saying, I don't care about that stuff.
Arakawa has said in interviews that she likes to include those more comedic moments to keep it entertaining.
And it's that gap between, what we expect is going to happen, and also like the quick change in tone. It gives us that little moment of pleasure there, and from the humor. And of course, he's actually, by doing that, he's pushing Cornello's buttons, because Cornello's really, wait a minute, don't don't just throw away all my ambitions with a casual word.
Yeah, Ed is good at pushing his buttons, pushing Cornello's buttons, and drawing him out so that he reveals his plan. In this case, he gets him to say, those idiots will believe anything I tell them. I've completely fooled them. And then they reveal that Rosé is hiding inside the armor, and it's scrunched up in the center of it. And so she's heard Cornello revealing that he's not this nice, benevolent guy. He's trying to fool everybody into following him.
And this is kind of an interesting strategy of Ed because, of course, we do get the feeling that he definitely wants to help Rosé in a way and kind of wake her up and get her to stop depending so much on false promises. Mm-hmm. But it's also strategic in a way because, for example, if he can deconvert Rosé, she's kind of very well liked in the community. That could also be big trouble for Cornello.
Now that Cornello has revealed that his miracles are fake, and she's shocked, and there's a big panel where she says, "You can't bring my darling back again," but he promises that he will be able to resurrect him with the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah, basically, I'm not the emissary of the god, but it doesn't mean I don't have power. So, you're one of my sheep, one of my followers, right? You should be on my side. And Ed and Al try to keep her from walking towards Cornello and choosing that side, but in the end, she does, and she says that this is all that she has left, basically all that she has to depend on or lean on.
Yeah, the English says this is the only choice I can make, but yeah, slightly different maybe from the Japanese. Yeah.
And the word comes up again at the end, and that's why I kind of pointed out.
Was it Tayoru?
Sugaru.
Sugaru, okay.
Yeah.
Cornello opens a panel in the wall, and it says "Open Sesame" on it, and there's a lever there that he pulls down, and it releases a chimera, a combination of different animals. In this case, a lion's head and front legs, a bird's back feet, and a lizard's tail. But he's the size of a lion, or maybe bigger. And Cornello says, this chimera will take care of you.
Yeah, he's more the size of a liger.
A liger?
Ligers are actual creatures, hybrid creatures, lion father, tiger mother. The lion mother and tiger fathers both have genes that limit the size, the growth. But since ligers have neither of those, they tend to grow pretty big. They're the biggest cats on the planet. And they actually do exist. I didn't believe it at first, but I went to... do you know who Tippi Hedren is?
I've heard the name.
Actress in The Birds.
Okay.
She runs a sanctuary for big cats in north of LA, and I timed one of my vacations to go to one of her open houses for people who donate to her sanctuary, and I saw a real live liger named Patrick the Liger. And I think I've always been fascinated by these combination creatures, and I think that's why I'm really enjoying the research I'm doing now, which is monster theory, which talks a lot about hybridity and this kind of how almost all monsters are created from things we already know. And this theme of chimera in this series is something very interesting. And, Ed himself is kind of a hybrid, which we will find out soon enough. For me, it's one of the most fascinating things about the series is the way that these hybrid creatures, the role they play.
Ed appears to be weaponless, but without a transmutation circle, he pulls a spear out of the ground, which surprises Cornello, but he's not willing to believe it's going to make any difference. That still won't be enough. And the chimera slashes at the weapon and cuts it to pieces.
Which is too bad because it's a nice looking spear, I mean, everything that Ed makes, it always has these little ornate things like little dragons and such. And so I guess when it's your imagination, when you're creating things from your imagination, that the ornateness kind of happens as a natural thing, or he spent a lot of time doodling in notebooks when he was younger. But yeah, so the weapon gets sliced to ribbons, and we see that Ed himself, his leg, has also been hit.
Yeah, his left pant leg is torn, and he acts as if he's been hurt, and Cornello says, "Wah ha ha ha, well, how do you like the taste of claws that can cut through iron?" And Rosé is concerned, "Edward," but then Edward grins and says, "Psych." And then on cue, some of the Chimera's claws just break off. And we see that his lower leg is steel. It's, or what they call automail.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what the auto part of that means, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
But maybe that's something we can look at as we go through. But yeah, and then the Chimera comes at it with fangs this time.
Yeah, well, the Chimera apparently understands human language because Cornello says, "What's the matter? If your claws won't work, then bite him to death." So the Chimera does exactly that, but he chooses to bite on Ed's right arm, which his teeth can't penetrate at all. But we can't see why yet because his sleeve is over it and his glove.
Well, there's what we don't know about the Chimeras, that we don't know what he was created from. Even with the Philosopher's Stone, he said minimum to maximum. So, I mean, there must have been some kind of minimum thing that he used to create this thing. But I guess if he was able to create anything, he could easily create a monster that understands his commands.
Mm-hmm.
It's digging into Ed's arm, but it's not seeming to do any damage. And so then Ed gives him a swift kick in the jaw.
Yeah, he said, "What's the matter, kitty? Tastes bad?" And then crack. So now we see his sleeve is torn and the arm is also metal. And he says, "This is what happens when you use alchemy on humans. This is what happens to sinners who trespass in God's domain." And Cornello, ulp, automail, full steel prosthetics, full metal prosthetics, so that's why. And then big reveal on the next page, the Fullmetal Alchemist, as Ed removes his cape and we see the entire right arm is metal.
Yeah, it's very, very dramatic panel. This particular pose gets used a lot in the merchandise, and it's easy to see why. It's just you get a nice dramatic shot of the metallic arm, and he's whisking his jacket away dramatically. It's really good, and you can't quite see his features. Mm-hmm. It's really nice, dramatic. In fact, I think I bought. From the museum show, I think I bought a clear plastic folder with this with this design.
I see. And then, final panel. Ed says, "Come down here and face me, you third-rate fraud. I'll show you there's no comparison between us." So our cliffhanger is this face-off between Ed and Cornello. So, quite interesting first chapter. Actually, I had kind of forgotten. I mean, my thought about this first volume was that, there's not really anything beyond just introduction of Ed and Al, but I think there is a little more to it. I mean, it's establishing so much that's going to be important throughout the series about alchemy and about state alchemists and so on and so forth. The first volume, I mean, they're kind of side stories, but still there's a lot in there that's important. She's introducing a lot of concepts.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to imagine that she hadn't planned out almost the whole series. At least the parts that she was going to reveal later, because everything fits like so perfectly together. And yeah, there's so many things that you just kind of walk right by without realizing how important they are, and that's good writing.
Okay, so we'll be back in a week with Chapter 2. So thanks for listening. And
See you next time.
Okay. Our theme is Cryosyncope by Winterfiend. The next episode will appear in the Deconstructing Comics feed in October and the third in November. Support us at patreon.com/deconcomics to help make this podcast more frequent and to have its own feed. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, I'll be interviewing the hot new talent Zoe Thorogood about her new graphic novel, The Impending Blindness of Billy Scott. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.
I forgot what my catchphrase was.